Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who destroy you fastest. 6 years. That's how long Claire and I had been building what I thought was our perfect life together. Our suburban home with its white picket fence wasn't just a house. It was supposed to be our sanctuary, our foundation for the family we dreamed about since our wedding day. I'm Ethan Ward, 32 years old, and I believed in loyalty the way some people believe in religion. Maybe that was my first mistake. The changes started subtly, the way poison seeps into water. Claire had always been ambitious. It was one of the things I loved about her when we met 7 years ago. Her drive, her determination to climb the corporate ladder at Meridian Marketing. But when Richard Hale became her new boss 8 months ago, something shifted. At first I was proud. Claire was finally getting the recognition she deserved, working directly under the company's vice president. "Ethan, you don't understand how important this project is," she'd say, her laptop glowing in our darkened bedroom as I tried to sleep. "Richard says if I nail this presentation, I could be looking at a senior coordinator position by Christmas." Richard says. Those two words became the soundtrack of our marriage's slow death, though I didn't recognize the melody at the time. Richard says we need to work late. Richard says the client dinner is mandatory. Richard says the weekend strategy session can't wait until Monday. I trusted her. God help me, I trusted her completely. The first real warning sign came on a Thursday night in March. I'd made dinner, her favorite pasta with the sauce that took me 3 hours to prepare from scratch. The table was set with candles, a bottle of wine breathing beside her plate. I even bought flowers, those expensive white roses she loved from the boutique downtown. Our 6th anniversary was approaching, and I wanted to remind her of what we had built together. But Claire's chair remained empty until nearly midnight. When she finally walked through our front door, her hair was disheveled, her lipstick gone, and there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before. A mixture of guilt and defiance that made my stomach clench. "The presentation ran long," she said, without looking at me, dropping her purse on the counter, where it landed with a heavy thud. "Richard wanted to go over the numbers one more time." I gestured to the cold pasta, the wilted flowers, the congealed candle wax. "I made dinner." "I texted you." Her voice was sharp, defensive. "No, Claire, you didn't." That's when she looked at me directly for the first time, and I saw something that would haunt me for months to come. She was annoyed. Not apologetic, not guilty, but irritated that I had the audacity to expect my wife to come home for dinner, to expect basic consideration in our marriage. "Well, I meant to text you," she said, already heading toward the stairs. "I'm exhausted, Ethan. Can we not do this tonight?" But we never did do this. Every attempt at conversation about her increasingly erratic schedule was met with the same response: work stress, important projects, Richard's high expectations. My wife had become a stranger who shared my bed but lived in a world I wasn't allowed to enter. The overnight trip started in April. Business conferences, she said, team-building retreats, client meetings in distant cities that required her to stay in hotels I never heard her book, using expense accounts that never seemed to appear on our joint credit card statements. "Where exactly is this conference?" I asked one morning, watching her pack lingerie I'd never seen her wear from me. "Chicago," she replied without hesitation, folding a black lace teddy into her suitcase like it was a business suit. "The Marriott downtown. Richard's presenting our quarterly strategy to potential investors." I memorized those details because something deep in my gut was screaming warnings I didn't want to hear. That night, alone in our bed, I called the Marriott downtown Chicago. There was no marketing conference, no group booking under Meridian Marketing, no Richard Hale registered as a guest. My hands shook as I hung up the phone. The woman I'd loved for 7 years, the woman I'd built a life with, the woman who wore my ring and shared my name, had looked me in the eye and lied with the casual ease of someone ordering coffee. Sleep became impossible. I lay there staring at the ceiling of our bedroom, surrounded by the photos of our life together. Our wedding picture on the nightstand showed Claire laughing, her head thrown back in joy, my arms wrapped around her like I could protect her from anything the world might throw at us. The irony was suffocating. The next morning, I called in sick for work for the first time in 3 years. I sat in my home office, supposedly working on code, but actually researching private investigators. The rational part of my brain kept insisting I was overreacting, that there had to be an explanation. But the analytical side of my programmer's mind was already connecting dots I didn't want to see. Late-night texts she quickly deleted, phone calls she took in the garage or bathroom, new clothes appearing in her wardrobe, expensive pieces that didn't match our budget or her previous style. The way she'd started working out obsessively, coming home from the gym with a glow that had nothing to do with exercise and everything to do with anticipation. The most damning evidence was the simplest. Claire had stopped touching me. Not just sexually, though our intimacy had dwindled to nothing over the past 4 months, she'd stopped touching me entirely. No casual hand on my shoulder when she passed behind my chair. No goodbye kisses that lasted more than a perfunctory peck. No unconscious reaching for me in sleep. When someone you love stops touching you, it's because they're touching someone else. But I still wasn't prepared for what I would discover next, and how completely my world would shatter when the truth finally revealed itself in all its ugly, devastating details. The proof came on a rainy Tuesday morning in May, delivered by Claire's own carelessness, like a confession wrapped in betrayal. She'd rushed out of the house that morning, claiming another early meeting with Richard, and in her haste, she'd left her personal phone charging on the kitchen counter. Claire always carried 2 phones, her work device and her personal iPhone. But lately, she'd been guarding that personal phone like it contained state secrets. I stared at it for 20 minutes, my coffee growing cold, as I wrestled with the decision that would end my marriage. The rational part of my mind screamed that looking through your spouse's phone was a violation of trust. But what trust was left to violate? The woman who'd shared my bed had become a stranger, and that stranger was destroying the life we'd built together. When the phone buzzed with a text notification, I didn't have to unlock it. The preview was enough to stop my heart. Richard, can't wait to feel you again tonight. The Peninsula Hotel, room 2847. I've missed those sounds you make when The phone slipped from my hands, clattering onto the tile floor, like my world crashing down around me. I sat there in our kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of our shared life, the coffee mugs we'd bought on our honeymoon, the refrigerator covered with photos of happier times, and felt something inside me die. But I forced myself to pick up the phone. I needed to know everything. I needed to understand the scope of what Claire had done to us, to me, to the 6 years I'd spent believing in something that had apparently been a lie for months. The messages painted a picture so vivid and brutal that I had to stop reading twice to vomit. This wasn't a recent development or a moment of weakness that had spiraled out of control. This affair had been going on for at least 5 months, based on the message history I could access. 5 months of elaborate lies, of Claire coming home to me after being with him, of her letting me hold her and kiss her and tell her I loved her, while she was planning her next rendezvous with her boss. The details were nauseating. Richard wasn't just sleeping with my wife, he was treating her like his personal plaything, buying her expensive gifts that she'd hidden from me, promising her promotions and raises that came with sexual expectations. The power dynamic made it even more sickening. This wasn't just adultery. It was predatory manipulation disguised as romance. But the message that broke something fundamental inside me was from 3 days earlier. Claire, Ethan's been suspicious lately, asking questions about the conferences. Richard, don't worry, baby. After this quarter's bonuses come through, we'll have enough to make our move. Just keep playing the devoted wife a little longer. Claire, it's getting harder. Sometimes I look at him and feel sick about what we're doing. Richard, you feel sick because you're settling for less than you deserve. He's a code monkey, Claire. I'm offering you a real life. A code monkey? 6 years of marriage, and that's how my wife described me to her lover. Not as the man who'd supported her dreams, who'd worked overtime to pay for her MBA classes, who'd held her when she cried after her father's funeral. I was just an obstacle to overcome, a stepping stone to discard when something shinier came along. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely screenshot the evidence, but I managed to capture everything. Messages, photos she'd sent him, even a video I couldn't bear to watch more than a few seconds of. The woman in that video looked like my wife, but she was someone I'd never seen before. Wild, abandoned, passionate in ways she'd never been with me. The sound of Claire's key in the front door sent me into panic mode. I quickly placed her phone back exactly where she'd left it and retreated to my home office, my heart hammering against my ribs. I listened to her moving around the kitchen, probably checking her phone, probably reading whatever new message Richard had sent him. Ethan? Her voice floated up the stairs, sickeningly normal. I'm home early. Want to grab lunch together? The audacity was breathtaking. She was standing in our kitchen, probably still reading messages from her lover, and inviting me to lunch like she was the same woman I'd married. Like she hadn't spent the morning planning another hotel rendezvous while I was working to pay our mortgage. I'm busy, I called back, not trusting myself to see her face without revealing everything I now knew. Okay, I'll just grab something and head back to the office. Love you. Love you. The words hit me like physical blows. How do you say love you to someone you're systematically betraying? How do you sleep next to them every night knowing you're living a lie so complete it would destroy them if they knew the truth? That afternoon, I called my sister Emma. She's a family lawyer, sharp as a blade and protective of me to a fault. When I told her I needed legal advice about a hypothetical divorce situation, her lawyer instincts kicked in immediately. Ethan, what's going on? This doesn't sound hypothetical. I broke down then, sitting in my car in an empty parking lot, and told her everything. The lies, the affair, the messages I'd found. Emma listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions with the clinical detachment that made her such a good attorney. She said finally, "You need to document everything. Don't confront her yet. Don't let her know anything. If you're serious about divorce, we need to be strategic about this." I don't want strategy, Emma. I want my wife back. I want this to not be happening. I know, little brother. But that woman stopped being your wife the moment she chose Richard Hale over her marriage. Now we need to protect you from the fallout. That night, Claire came home late again, claiming another work crisis. She kissed my cheek, a gesture that now felt like acid on my skin, and told me about her day with the same casual dishonesty she'd perfected over months of practice. I sat there, nodding and responding appropriately, while inside I screamed with the knowledge of what she had really been doing. But Claire wasn't done destroying me. She had one more devastating revelation waiting, one that would turn this betrayal into something so much worse than simple adultery. Something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd loved and force me to make decisions I never imagined I'd have to face. The pregnancy test sat on our bathroom counter like a loaded weapon. Claire had left it there, deliberately, positioned where I couldn't miss it when I came upstairs after my morning coffee. 2 pink lines. Positive. The result she'd probably been hoping for, planning for, orchestrating as part of whatever twisted future she'd been building with Richard Hale. "Ethan!" Her voice called from the bedroom, artificially bright and excited. "Can you come here for a minute?" I stared at that test, my analytical mind racing through timelines and possibilities. Claire and I hadn't been intimate in over 2 months, not since March, when she'd started pulling away, claiming exhaustion and work stress. The last time we'd made love, she'd been distracted, checking her phone even as I kissed her neck, her mind clearly somewhere else entirely. But someone had gotten my wife pregnant, and we both knew it wasn't me. "Ethan!" Claire appeared in the bathroom doorway, wearing the silk robe I'd bought her last Christmas. She looked radiant, glowing with the kind of happiness I hadn't seen from her in months. "Did you see?" I picked up the test with hands that felt disconnected from my body. "You're pregnant." "We're pregnant," she corrected, moving closer, her eyes bright with what looked like genuine joy. "Can you believe it? After all this time trying, it finally happened." The lie was so breathtaking, so complete in its audacity, that for a moment I couldn't speak. After all this time trying? We hadn't been trying for months. We hadn't barely been touching for months. But there she stood, my wife of 6 years, spinning a fantasy so elaborate it bordered on psychotic. "How far along?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. "The doctor thinks about 6 weeks. That must have happened in early April. Remember that night after the Johnson account presentation? We celebrated with that expensive wine, and you were so passionate." I did remember that night. It was one of the last times we'd been together before she started her overnight trips with Richard. But I also remembered that Claire had insisted on showering immediately afterward, claiming she felt sticky. Now I wondered if she'd been washing away evidence, already planning to attribute any pregnancy to me rather than her lover. "This is wonderful news," I said, the words tasting like poison. "Incredible timing." Claire's face lit up even brighter. "I know. And Richard, my boss, he's been so supportive about work-life balance lately. He says the company has excellent maternity benefits. We'll be able to afford everything the baby needs." Richard. Even in this moment, announcing what she believed was our child, she couldn't stop herself from bringing him into the conversation. The man who was actually the father of the baby she was asking me to claim, support, and raise as my own. Over the following days, I watched Claire transform into an expectant mother with Oscar-worthy performance skills. She bought pregnancy books, started taking prenatal vitamins, and called her mother to share the wonderful news about our growing family. She even suggested we start looking at cribs and nursery furniture. The most sickening part was how convincing she was. If I hadn't known about Richard, hadn't seen those messages, hadn't done the timeline math, I might have believed her completely. Claire had always been a good actress, but this level of deception was masterful. She was asking me to help plan for a child that wasn't mine, to be excited about a pregnancy that was the physical evidence of her betrayal. But I played along because Emma was right about strategy. I needed more evidence, more documentation, more proof of what Claire was really doing before I could make my move. So I smiled when she showed me baby name books. I nodded when she talked about converting the spare room into a nursery. I even went with her to her first prenatal appointment, sitting in that waiting room surrounded by genuinely happy couples while my world crumbled around me. Dr. Martinez was Claire's longtime gynecologist, a kind woman who'd been encouraging us to start a family for years. When she congratulated us on finally conceiving, I wanted to scream the truth. Instead, I squeezed Claire's hand and tried to look like an excited father-to-be. Based on your last menstrual period and the ultrasound measurements, I'd put your due date around January 15th. That makes you about 8 weeks along. 8 weeks, not 6 weeks. 8 weeks put conception in mid-March, right around the time she'd started her overnight trips with Richard, right around the time she'd stopped being intimate with me, except for that one carefully orchestrated night she was now using as her cover story. Claire's face flickered with something. Surprise? Concern? But she recovered quickly, laughing and saying she'd never been good with dates. Dr. Martinez smiled and adjusted the due date in her records, completely unaware that she was documenting evidence of adultery. That night, Claire was more affectionate than she'd been in months. She curled up against me in bed, placing my hand on her stomach and talking about our future together, our child's future, the life we were going to build as a family of 3. "I love you so much, Ethan. You're going to be such an amazing father." I lay there, feeling her warm body pressed against me, listening to her spin fantasies about a future built on lies, and wondered how someone could be so completely without conscience. She wasn't just asking me to raise another man's child, she was asking me to do it while believing it was mine. She was planning to let me love this baby, support this child, build my entire identity around being a father while knowing the truth. But Claire made one crucial mistake in her elaborate deception. She underestimated me. She assumed I would never question her, never investigate, never piece together the evidence she'd been careless enough to leave behind. She thought she was dealing with the same trusting, loyal husband who'd never doubted her word. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Because while Claire was planning nurseries and picking baby names, I was planning something entirely different. I was building a case, documenting evidence, and preparing for the conversation that would end our marriage and expose every lie she'd told. Emma was right. I needed to be strategic, but I also needed to be devastating. Claire wanted to play games with our future? Fine. But she was about to discover that I knew how to win them.
The moment came on a Thursday evening in June, 8 weeks after Claire had announced her pregnancy with Richard Hale's child. I'd spent those weeks gathering evidence, documenting lies, and building an airtight case with Emma's guidance. But more than that, I'd spent them watching my wife perfect her deception, marveling at how easily she could look me in the eye and lie about the most fundamental aspects of our life together. Claire was in the kitchen, humming while she prepared what she called baby-friendly dinner options, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. She'd started showing earlier than most first-time mothers, another detail that supported the timeline I'd calculated. She looked happy, content, like a woman building the family she'd always dreamed of with the man she loved. She had no idea that man wasn't me anymore. "Claire," I said, setting my laptop on the kitchen island, "we need to talk." Something in my tone made her pause mid-stir. She turned from the stove, wooden spoon still in hand, and I saw the first flicker of uncertainty cross her face. "What about?" she asked, but her voice had lost its casual warmth. I opened the laptop and turned the screen toward her. The display showed a folder titled Evidence, containing screenshots, phone records, hotel receipts I'd tracked down, and a timeline documenting her affair with Richard. Claire's face went white as she recognized her own messages, her own lies, laid out in chronological order like a prosecutor's case file. "I know about Richard," I said quietly. "I know about the hotels, the fake conferences, the 5 months you've been cheating on me. And I know that baby isn't mine." The wooden spoon clattered to the floor. Claire's hand flew to her stomach in a protective gesture that might have been touching if she wasn't carrying another man's child while living in my house. "Ethan, I can explain." "Explain what? How you looked me in the eye and lied about being pregnant with my child? How you've been planning our nursery while screwing your boss? How you called me a code monkey to the man you've been cheating with?" Each question hit her like a physical blow. Claire sank onto one of our kitchen stools, her face cycling through shock, fear, and finally something that looked almost like relief. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "Long enough to document everything. Long enough to consult with divorce attorneys. Long enough to have your lover investigated by a private detective." That last part was a bluff, but Claire's reaction told me it hit home. Her eyes widened with panic. "You hired a private investigator?" "I didn't have to hire anyone, Claire. You and Richard were sloppy. Hotel receipts on the company credit card, phone records showing calls during times you claimed to be in meetings, security cameras at restaurants where you thought you were invisible. I was making most of this up, but Claire's guilt was doing the work for me. She was assuming I knew everything, filling in details with her own paranoia." "What do you want?" she asked finally, her voice barely audible. "I want the truth. All of it. When did it start? How long have you been planning to pass his child off as mine? What were you and Richard going to do when the baby was born?" Claire's composure cracked completely then. Tears streamed down her face as she told me everything. How Richard had pursued her from her first day working under him. How he'd promised her promotions and raises and a lifestyle I could never provide. How the pregnancy had been an accident that became an opportunity when Richard suggested she could use it to secure our marriage while they figured out their next move. "He said once the baby was born, we could do a paternity test privately," she sobbed. "If you never suspected, we'd never have to tell you. If you found out later, we'd deal with it then." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. They'd been planning to let me bond with this child, to love it as my own, before potentially ripping that away when it became convenient. They'd been willing to destroy not just me, but an innocent baby to protect their affair. And if the paternity test proved the baby was Richard's? He promised he'd leave his wife, we'd get married and he'd take care of everything. His position at the company, his connections. He could give me opportunities you never could. There it was. The truth beneath all the lies. This wasn't about love or passion or even attraction. This was Claire trading up, using her body and our marriage as leverage to climb social and economic ladders she thought I'd never be able to build for her. Where is he now? He's at home with his family. He doesn't know you found out. Call him. Claire's eyes widened. What? Call Richard. Tell him I know everything and that I want to speak with him tonight. Ethan, please, you don't understand the position this puts him in. I don't give a damn about his position. The words exploded out of me with months of suppressed rage. He's been sleeping with my wife. He got her pregnant. He's been planning to destroy my life while I pay the mortgage on the house where you two have been planning your future together. Claire flinched at my volume, but she made the call. I listened to her stumbling explanation, watched her face crumble further as Richard's response became clear. When she hung up, she looked like she'd been slapped. What did he say? He said this is exactly what he was afraid of, that I'd been sloppy and compromised everything. Her voice was hollow. He said he needs time to think about damage control. Damage control. Not concern for Claire or the baby or even their relationship, just corporate speak about managing a crisis. The man she destroyed our marriage for was already calculating how to minimize his losses. Claire, do you understand what you've done? Not just to me, but to yourself. You threw away 6 years of marriage for a man who's treating you like a liability the moment things get complicated. But something had shifted in Claire's expression. The guilt and remorse were hardening into something else. Defiance. At least I tried to build something better, she said, standing up straighter. At least I didn't just settle for a mediocre life in suburbia with a man who's content to write code and never take any risks. There was the real Claire. Not the tearful, remorseful woman who'd been caught in lies, but the ambitious, calculating person who'd been planning this betrayal for months. The woman who saw our marriage as settling, our home as a prison, our life together as something to escape rather than cherish. You're right, I said quietly. You deserve so much better than a loyal husband who loved you unconditionally. You deserve exactly what you're about to get. The divorce papers were already prepared, sitting in Emma's office, waiting for my signature. But Claire was about to discover that her lover's promises of protection and support were as empty as her wedding vows had become.
The divorce papers hit Claire's desk on Meridian Marketing on a Friday morning, delivered by a process server who made sure to announce loudly that he had legal documents for Mrs. Claire Ward regarding dissolution of marriage proceedings. I'd specifically requested that timing. Maximum humiliation, maximum exposure with her coworkers and Richard witnessing the public destruction of the image she'd worked so hard to maintain. But that was just the opening move. Emma had been thorough in ways that made me grateful she was on my side. The divorce filing didn't just cite irreconcilable differences, it named Richard Hale specifically as the reason for the marriage's breakdown, detailed the adultery with dates and locations, and included a request for DNA testing of the unborn child to establish paternity. In our state, adultery affected everything from asset division to spousal support, and Emma had built a case that would leave Claire with virtually nothing. The real brilliance was in the corporate implications. Meridian Marketing had strict policies about sexual harassment and workplace relationships, especially those involving power imbalances between supervisors and subordinates. By naming Richard in the divorce filing, Emma had essentially forced the company to investigate or face potential liability for enabling a hostile work environment. Claire called me 17 times that Friday. I didn't answer any of them. Richard, meanwhile, was learning that his promises to take care of everything were easier made than kept. Emma's investigation had revealed that he'd used company resources to fund his affair with Claire, corporate credit cards for hotel rooms, business trips that were actually romantic getaways, expense accounts that documented a pattern of financial misconduct that could result in criminal charges. By Monday morning, the story had spread through Meridian Marketing like wildfire. Claire's coworkers, who'd once envied her rapid promotions and special treatment from the VP, now understood exactly how she'd earned those privileges. The whispers followed her through every hallway, every meeting, every interaction. But Richard had made a calculation that revealed exactly what kind of man Claire had chosen over me. When the company's HR department called him in for questioning about the allegations in my divorce filing, he threw Claire under the bus completely. Emma had a contact in Meridian's legal department who kept us informed of the proceedings. According to her source, Richard claimed that Claire had pursued him, that she'd threatened to file false harassment claims if he didn't comply with her advances, that the pregnancy was her attempt to trap him into leaving his wife. He painted himself as the victim of a manipulative subordinate who'd exploited their professional relationship for personal gain. Claire was fired that Wednesday for violating company policy and creating a hostile work environment. Richard received a formal reprimand and was transferred to a different division, a slap on the wrist that protected the company's investment in a VP while sacrificing the expendable marketing coordinator. The woman who'd called me a code monkey, who'd planned to use me to raise another man's child while building a new life with her lover, discovered that her lover was perfectly willing to destroy her reputation to save his own career. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The private investigator I actually hired, not the bluff I'd used during our confrontation, had uncovered something even more damaging. Richard Hale had a pattern. Claire wasn't his first affair with a subordinate. Over his 15-year career, he'd targeted at least 3 other young, ambitious women, making the same promises, using the same manipulation tactics. One of those women left the company quietly after becoming pregnant. Another suffered a performance review after trying to end their relationship. Emma helped me contact these women, and together we built a case that went far beyond my divorce. We filed complaints with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, contacted journalists who specialized in workplace harassment stories, and reached out to Meridian's board of directors with evidence of a pattern of predatory behavior that the company had either ignored or actively covered up. Within 2 months, Richard Hale was facing potential criminal charges for sexual harassment, his wife had filed for divorce after learning about his serial affairs, and Meridian Marketing was dealing with a public relations nightmare that would cost them millions in legal settlements and reputation damage. Claire, meanwhile, was discovering what life looked like without the safety net of our marriage or the promises of her powerful lover. Her unemployment benefits wouldn't cover the rent on the luxury apartment she'd planned to share with Richard. The designer maternity clothes she'd bought with money from our joint savings account would have to be returned. The future she'd envisioned, wealthy, connected, free from the mediocre life she'd shared with me, evaporated like morning fog. She tried to reconcile in October, when she was 7 months pregnant and facing the reality of single motherhood with no job, no savings, and no support system. The woman who'd once called our suburban home a prison begged to come back to it. "Ethan, please," she said, sitting in my lawyer's office during our final settlement meeting. Her pregnancy was showing clearly now, and she looked exhausted, defeated. "I made a terrible mistake, the worst mistake of my life. But we can get past this. We can raise this baby together and rebuild what we had." I looked at this woman who had once been my wife, who'd shared my bed while planning my betrayal, who'd asked me to father another man's child while she built a secret life with her lover. Claire was beautiful, even now. She was carrying a child that would need love and support. Part of me, the part that had loved her for 7 years, wanted to believe that redemption was possible. But Emma's hand on my shoulder reminded me of everything Claire had been willing to do to me, to our marriage, to an innocent child. The pre-planned deception, the calculated lies, the absence of remorse until her schemes collapsed around her. "The baby deserves a father who loves them unconditionally," I said quietly. "That's not me, Claire. It never could be me. But Richard owes child support, and when the paternity test proves what we both know, he'll be legally responsible for the consequences of his choices." The divorce was finalized in December. Claire received minimal spousal support, limited by the adultery clause and her own earning potential. The house, our savings, our shared assets were divided in ways that left her with enough to start over, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd been chasing. Richard's child support payments began the month after the paternity test confirmed what everyone already knew. His ex-wife's divorce settlement had been even more brutal than mine, leaving him financially devastated and professionally ruined. The man who'd promised Claire a better life could barely afford his own apartment. 3 years later, I'm sitting in a coffee shop downtown, working on code for a startup that's about to make me wealthy beyond anything Claire ever imagined. Emma introduced me to Sarah, a brilliant architect who loves me for exactly who I am, rather than who she thinks I could become. We're getting married next spring. Claire works as a receptionist at a dental office and shares custody of her daughter with Richard, who married his secretary 6 months after his divorce was final. The powerful, charismatic man who'd seduced her away from our marriage turned out to be just another middle-aged cheater who'd traded one family for another, leaving destruction in his wake. Sometimes I see her at the grocery store, or picking up her daughter from daycare. She looks older, worn down by the consequences of choices that seemed so clever when she was making them. She doesn't approach me anymore, doesn't try to make small talk or pretend we can be friendly. I think she finally understands that some betrayals are too complete for forgiveness, too calculated for redemption. Claire didn't just cheat on me. She was willing to let me build my entire identity around loving a child that wasn't mine while she planned her escape with another man. She wanted a better life, and she got exactly what she deserved. Justice served cold, seasoned with the bitter taste of consequences that money can't buy and power can't erase.